Chapter 4 of The Beginning All Wisdom by Maeglin Yedi. This part is explicit, so be forewarned, and all that jazz. Harry sat in the smallest reception room in Black Manor instead of his friend, who occupied the opposite couch. He'd just told them the truth about what had been happening the past year, how he had been using the amulets non-stop until Dumbledore arrived to put a stop to it. Hermione was pale with shock and disbelief as she stared at Harry with wide, shimmering eyes. Ron's face flushed instead, as he worried his lips, staring down at his lap until he finally found his voice and glanced up at Harry. "You really became friends with Malfoy?" Rolling his eyes, Harry chuckled. Of course Ron would take that away from the whole sordid tale. Ron had always been the jealous type, and knowing Harry had made a new friend was apparently more important than knowing Harry had been scrambling his own brain for a whole year. "Honestly, Ron," Hermione snapped, glaring at Ron with all her might before she focused her attention on Harry. "That's the least of our concern. I can't understand how you would spend a whole year cheating your way through our classes and thought you could get away with it." And that is exactly what Harry had expected Hermione to say about the whole thing, hence why he never mentioned the amulets to her in the first place. He shrugged and glanced at some of the severe-looking black ancestors who were watching them from the portraits. Harry had noticed most of those portraits didn't seem disapproving when Harry confessed to using the amulets to study magic for a whole year, and he wondered if perhaps certain pureblood families made it a habit to let their children use them, consequences be damned. They're not illegal when used for language learning, nor is it considered cheating to use them, Harry said with a patient but blank smile. He wanted to get this whole conversation over and done with as soon as possible. Hermione huffed and crossed her arms over her chest and leaned back into the couch. "Of course you would say that." "Well, it's not," Ron said in Harry's defense, much to Harry's surprise. I know Percy saved up some money to use a few of them to learn languages, and my parents were fine with that. Bill also used a few language ones, and he started working for Gringotts, and I know Charlie used a Romanian one when he was hired at the Dragon Reserve. Dad told me that you shouldn't use them for anything else because it would damage your brain, but it's not considered cheating to use them. Hermione frowned as she pursed her lips, obviously unsure if she would challenge that belief or not. In the end, she decided to change the subject. "I noticed you seemed distant and withdrawn in the first half of the school year, but I thought the Dementors were bothering you. Lots of students were a bit depressed in their presence." Hermione sighed, shoulders relaxing a bit. "But after Christmas, once the Dementors are gone, you seem to cheer up again. So I didn't pay attention to it anymore." That was when he and Draco had become friends, Harry recalled with a small smile. Evidently that had improved Harry's mood to such an extent that Harry had even noticed it. That Hermione even noticed it. "It still bothers me a lot that you kept secrets from us, Harry," Hermione said, voice full of disapproval. She raised her chin a bit to give him a look of superiority, and though Harry doubted she realised she was doing it, Hermione was very insecure at heart, and one way she tried to protect her fragile ego was through condescension, whether she realised it or not. "So you can keep your time turner a secret for a full year, but I can't keep some of my life private when I choose to," Harry said, eager to point out Hermione's hypocrisy. "Wait, what? A time turner?" Ron demanded, sitting looking from Harry to Ron in disbelief. "You were using a time turner the whole year, and is that how you got to all of your classes when they were held simultaneously?" Hermione slapped her hand down on her thigh in clear frustration. "I wasn't allowed to tell anyone, while Harry was breaking the law and keeping that a secret, which is clearly a different matter." "Not from where I'm sitting," Harry said, keeping his posture casual, then sighed. I suppose we're all growing up. Adults keep lots of secrets from each other. Hardly anyone wants to share their private business once they're grown. Suddenly, Hermione looked like she was about to cry. I don't want to change, and yet we will, Harry said, not unkindly. He understood Hermione's reluctance to grow up, because last year Harry had shared that sentiment as well. But when he learned how amazing it was to better yourself and to improve your magic and your knowledge, and he concluded that the change did not have to be a bad thing. But you're done using those amulets now, aren't you? Ron said with a small frown. Harry nodded. Ron added, shame. I wouldn't have minded using one for potions, at least. Ron, they're dangerous. Harry just spent 10 minutes explaining that to us. Hermione threw her hands up and shook her head, turning away from Ron entirely. Would have been worth it to be able to pass Snape's class there. Ron mumbled while sharing a grin with Harry. That's what I thought last summer. Harry laughed for a moment because he was relieved that at least one of his friends understood his motives for having tried the amulets in the first place. The worst of the conversation was over, much to Harry's relief, and he still had his two oldest friends. Harry would have hated to lose them. They talked a bit more about some of the things Harry had learned. Harry showed off his animagus form and promised to teach Ron and Hermione the Patronus charm, since they were interested in learning it. Ron and Hermione stayed for lunch, and afterwards Sirius apparated Hermione home, since she and her parents were set to go on holiday to France the next day. Ron used the flute to return to the Burrow with the promise that he and Harry would meet up soon again. Harry hadn't yet had the heart to tell Ron he wouldn't be able to come to the Quidditch World Cup this summer. Ron had had enough shocks for one day. Harry would tell him in a few weeks. The next day, Harry received a long letter from Draco in which he explained he wouldn't be able to meet up with Harry for the rest of the summer because his mother had grounded him as an additional punishment. Harry wrote back at once, telling his new best friend how much he missed him and how it sucked they'd have to wait a whole summer to see each other. That evening, during dinner, which Harry shared with Sirius and Ron in the smallest dining room, Harry gave the others a brief rundown of some of the things he'd learned thanks to the amulets. Sirius got a bit of a look on his face. Sorry, completely blanked for a second. A look on his face as he tilted his head to give Harry a contemplative look. It's a shame I won't be able to teach you any of those things now. I'd been looking forward to help you becoming an animagus and things like that. Yeah, Harry said while nodding in understanding. It would have been fun to learn some things from his godfather. Then he got an idea. You could teach me how to apparate. I'd love to learn, and it might help out if I ever run into Voldemort again. Harry told Sirius all about his adventures with Voldemort and all the letters he'd been sending his godfather once he was declared innocent. Sirius shared a brief look with Remus. That might not be such a bad idea, Sirius mumbled, when Remus nodded in agreement, Sirius gave Harry a wide smile. Oh, goodness. Sorry. Fine. Let's teach you how to apparate. They started the next day. Harry apparated to some remote locations around the countryside where Harry got to try apparition for the first time. Harry knew all about the theory, but had never had a chance to try it out for himself. It took him a few lessons, but he got the hang of it relatively quickly. Harry was allowed back his wand under supervision while Sirius and Remus renovate Black Manor. It was an ancient manor house in Cumbria. Ooh, sorry. My brain couldn't connect the word. It was an ancient house in Cumbria, surrounded by stiff gardens and wild forest and some farmland. all set in between rugged hills. The manor was dark and gloomy inside and out, and Sirius was determined to change that. Harry got to use all sorts of magic he had learned the previous years to completely renovate Sirius's ancestral home. Ron came to visit once or twice, and Harry spent a few days at the Burrow playing Quidditch with all the Weasley kids and enjoying Mrs. Weasley's cooking. Harry kept Draco up to date with his life at Black Manor, though most daily letters at Black Manor through almost daily letters. Hedwig got a good workout that summer, but she didn't seem to mind in the slightest. Draco apparently had very expensive owl treats he eagerly gave Hedwig to keep her happy and healthy enough to continue delivering Harry's letters. All in all, it was the best summer Harry had ever had. He missed the amulets and he still slept poorly from time to time, or woke up with a pounding headache. But that too lessened as the week passed, and Harry was determined to never use them again, no matter how tempting the idea sometimes still was. Harry was disappointed to miss the Quidditch World Cup, but Sirius and Remus stayed home as well, so they kept Harry suitably distracted with more projects around the manor. Daily Prophet reported about dark marks in the sky and attacks after the game, and Harry was secretly glad he'd missed the whole thing, which was always be more Quidditch game. There would always be more Quidditch games in the future, ones where to be able to attend with Draco. Before Harry knew it, August had come to an end, and it was time to return back to school. And while Harry would miss Sirius and Remus and life at Black Manor, he was very eager to see Draco again. He genuinely missed his best friend and couldn't wait to talk to him again face to face. So far, Ron seemed to be under the impression that Harry's friendship with Draco Malfoy, now that they weren't... Harry was going to drop his friendship with Draco Malfoy, now they weren't able to use the amulets again, and Harry hadn't bothered to correct his assumption. He didn't want to start a fight with Ron during the summer. That would ruin the best holidays he'd ever had. So now Ron would be in for a very unwelcome surprise, and Harry didn't care enough about that to keep him away from Draco. Pardon me. Very sorry. Sirius apparated to the train station just after 10, and Harry gave his godfather a tight hug before going off to secure a compartment for himself and Draco, just as they'd agreed. Draco appeared 10 minutes later, his whole face beaming when he saw Harry sitting by himself. They flung themselves at each other like they'd never wanted to let go again. Harry burrowed his face in the crook of Draco's neck and inhaled deeply. He'd even missed Draco's scent, for fuck's sake. "Hi," Draco said, once they pushed back a little, and that was all Harry allowed him to say before he crushed his lips to Draco's. He'd been thinking about kissing Draco for the whole bloody summer, and he couldn't stop thinking about it, even if he wanted to. He conjured up some very interesting scenarios while lying in bed, stroking himself to messy orgasm after messy orgasm. Draco returned the kiss once again, opening his mouth a little to seek out Harry's tongue with his own. And before Harry knew it, they were properly snogging, tongues moving around faster and deeper until Harry pulled back to inhale some much-needed air. "Fuck, I've missed you," Harry sighed, staring at Draco's pointy face, his grey eyes, his soft blonde hair. "I missed you too," Draco whispered, and hauled Harry back in for another good snog. Eventually they realised it was probably a good idea to cast some privacy charms on their compartment, lest the whole student body witnessed their make-out sessions. They knew enough spells to make sure no one would bother them, or would be able to see inside their compartment from the corridor, or from outside the platform. Once they had enough privacy, their kisses became more feverish. While Harry's cock grew hard in his jeans, Draco had the same problem, and they solved that by ripping their trousers open and giving each other a couple of sloppy handjobs while still attached at the lips. "Fuck me, I'm never leaving you alone again," Harry said with a satisfied sigh as he spurted his release all over Draco's slim hand. Draco had come all over Harry's jeans, but Harry couldn't be bothered yet to clean up. "Good, because I plan on keeping you forever, Harry." Draco held up his hand and examined Harry's semen with a critical eye before giving it a tentative lick. Harry's cock stirred at the sight, and Harry knew they would be spending plenty of time together in the Chamber of Secrets that year. Not just so they can learn about sex together. And not just so they could learn about sex together in every intimate way possible. Even if they wouldn't be using the amulets anymore, they still had plenty of magical knowledge stored away in their minds that they hadn't put to practical use yet. They had plenty of unstored magic left to practice in this chamber for years to come. As the train started moving, Harry sent his fox Patronus to Ron and Hermione, telling them that he would be spending the train ride with Draco and not to worry about him. He saw them walking past his compartment a few times, clearly looking for him. "Why do they act like you're minders?" Draco asked when Ron and Hermione came hurrying by for the third time in 30 minutes. "Can't a bloke spend some time with his boyfriend in peace?" "They're just worried," Harry said, giving Draco a small but warm smile. "They don't know we're boyfriends yet, or else they'd give us some privacy, I'm sure." "Best tell them soon then," Draco said with an annoyed little sniff, leaning his head on Harry's shoulder. So yeah, that's how Harry officially got an official boyfriend, much to his satisfaction. They spent the entire train ride discussing interesting magic, snogging rather a lot, and giving each other a few more hand jobs. They were a bunch of horny teenagers after all, and that could get hard and orgasm for days if needs be. Sorry, zoned out again. There we are. Sorry, I tend to check the time as I'm recording and it just wouldn't. There we are. Just need to check it was still working. There you are. Sorry for the interruption. "Where were you?" Hermione demanded when Harry joined his friends at the Gryffindor table right before the sorting. "We were looking all over the train for you." "Snogging my boyfriend," Harry said with a careless shrug. He had nothing to hide nowadays when it came to his relationship with Draco. "Didn't you get my Patronus?" "What?" Ron looked as though he thought someone had just announced Victor Crumb had died. Ron had not been able to stop talking about the amazing seeker ever since he'd seen him at the World Cup. "You and Malfoy are what?" "Boyfriends," Harry said with a terribly amused grin. This was a lot funnier than he thought it would be. Hermione didn't seem to know what to say, her mouth opening and closing a few times without any sound coming out. The sorting started and Ron and Hermione remained quiet while they processed Harry's happy news. Afterwards, Ron seemed to be mostly in denial, while Harry pointed out that Draco was a little prick who called her awful things in the past. "He's not like that anymore," Harry was quick to point out. "People change, Hermione. They grow up, even Draco." Harry shrugged and went back to his roast potatoes, while Draco was still a stuck-up Slytherin in many ways. There would possibly always be. He didn't overzealously subscribe to blood prejudice. He didn't zealously subscribe to blood prejudice. Goodness, didn't know why that one gave me so much trouble. He'd never been a big fan of Muggle-borns, but he was willing to tolerate them for Harry's sake, and that was enough for Harry. Well, I suppose we'll see, Hermione said with a sniff as she delicately cut into her steak. Then Ron announced the Drarry was a tournament, and suddenly his friends forgot all about Harry's relationship. Now the amulets were out of the bag, as it were. Harry saw no reason to hold back in his classes, neither did Draco. Their grades were bound to break records that year, much to Hermione's obvious frustration. After a week in, Harry learned that he could throw off the Imperious Curse, as could Draco. Malfoy held Harry back after class on Friday. Moody held Harry back after class on Friday. Moody limped towards Harry and gestured at the door. "Let's go. Have a cuppa in my office, lad." Harry followed the new defence teacher, though he had no intention of drinking anything the man offered him. Harry wasn't stupid, no matter that Alistair Moody was supposedly a good friend of Dumbledore and a renowned aura. Harry didn't trust anyone he'd only just met. Sorry about that. Needed to take a moment. I'm back. Surprisingly, Moody gave him an approving look when Harry turned down his offer for tea. They sat down in Moody's cluttered office. "Constant vigilance," Moody said, with a nod, folding his gnarled hands on top of his desk. "Heard you got into a bit of trouble with some amulets." Moody didn't sound all that angry, just merely curious. Harry shrugged, neither confirming nor denying anything. Moody chuckled, looking even more approving. "They should just outlaw them all. Even the language ones." Moody shook his head, artificial eye suddenly motionless in its socket. "When used in excess, even those will scramble someone's brain." "Really?" Harry leaned forward a bit. No one, not even Dumbledore, had mentioned anything about the language amulets being dangerous. "Oh, yeah," Moody grumbled, with a clearly disapproving frown. "They like to keep that quiet at the Ministry. Too many wizards need to use those language amulets to be able to do their jobs." Moody leaned forward, closer to Harry, a dark shadow lowering over his narrow gaze. "Wizards like Bartimus Crouch use over 200 of the bloody things, and before long they stop caring about anyone and anything, even going as far to sentence their only son to life in Azkaban, while he was only in the wrong place at the wrong time." Harry swallowed. He'd never heard of that, and he was sure Draco might know more. Draco always seemingly informed about such events. That was clear, though. What was clear, though, was that Moody despised Bartimus Crouch. The way his face paled and his eyes squinted, hinting at a more personal relationship between the two that had soured significantly in the past. Now Crouch is in charge of this blasted tournament, and people expect the uncaring bastard to come up with challenges that will keep the participants safe. Moody's snort told Harry exactly how little faith Moody had in Crouch's abilities to do just that. "I wouldn't be surprised if students got killed this year because of this bloody tournament." Moody spent 10 minutes ranting about Crouch and the tournament and Death Eaters and the Ministry. Harry listened politely and not giving much away in terms of replies or gestures. Eventually, Moody let him go and Harry went in search of Draco. Barely an hour before dinner, they barely had an hour before dinner, so they quickly warded an empty classroom instead of trooping all the way down to the Chamber of Secrets. Crouch Jr. was sentenced for the same crimes as dear Auntie Bella. Draco said, his nose wrinkled and cleared the distaste, after Harry told him what happened in Moody's office. Why Moody's so obsessed with Crouch Senior, I haven't a clue. Though Moody became pretty paranoid in his old age, according to father, so it might not mean anything. Maybe, Harry said, and then he hauled his boyfriend closer for a good snog. They'd only made it to dinner on time. They'd only just made it to dinner on time, and Harry ignored Hermione's disapproving frown and Ron's hurt look. Whenever Harry made it clear that he was going to spend time with Draco, Hermione would huff and Ron would sulk. Harry ignored them. He loved his friend, but he wasn't going to let their dramatics keep him from growing his relationship with Draco. Because Harry cared about Draco a great deal, that much was clear to him. And thankfully, that feeling seemed to be entirely mutual, if all the snogging and handjobs were any indication. The whole thing with Moody still didn't sit right with Harry, so Harry vowed to keep a close eye on the man. He started with consulting the Marauders' map as often as he could, still remembering the whole Pettigrew fiasco well enough. Moody spent all time in his office, even when he should be teaching classes. Moody was stationary in his office. Harry observed the map at several points during the day for a whole week, and Moody was always in his office in the same spot. In the evening, Bartimus Crouch was often in Moody's office as well, when Moody should be standing in front of the classroom. Harry saw Crouch on the map instead. What the hell is going on here? Harry asked as he and Draco were sitting in their cosy area inside the Chamber of Secrets, their map spread open on the lamps. Moody never ever moves from his office, and instead Bartimus Crouch shows up all over the place. That is odd, Draco said with what might be the understatement of the year. Let's look at what we actually know. Moody isn't teaching his classes. No, I only see Crouch's name in the classroom. Harry mumbled with a distracted nod. This was so bizarre that it made Harry's head spin. So Crouch is impersonating Moody, at least from time to time. Draco frowned and then said, Polyjuice Potion makes the most sense because Moody's always drinks from his flask throughout the day. He's keeping Moody captive in his office, Harry said, and stared at Draco eyes wide as he stared at Draco, for his hair as a potion ingredient. But why? Draco asked, with a shrewd look on his face. And why talk about him himself with such obvious disdain? Harry wondered out loud. Draco gestured toward the potion lab sitting in the corner. We still have the Vertiserum? I hate that word. Vertiserum. Sorry, that's the best you're getting. We still have the truth potion we brewed last year. We could simply ask him. Harry blinked and gave Draco a bright smile before pressing his lips against Draco's in a long, grateful kiss. It took them a while to figure out how to question Moody and/or Crouch. They contemplated trying to distract Moody and stun him, but Moody was a seasoned author, and even Crouch was an experienced duelist, so going head-to-head with them was probably a bad idea. They eventually decided on a switching spell. They practiced in the chambers until they could perform it flawlessly. Then, during the defense lesson, Harry asked Moody a couple questions, while Draco discreetly switched the potion in Moody's hip flask with a strong sleeping draught. Moody always returned to his office after class, so he sipped from his flask there, and Harry waited 10 minutes to open the office door to see Moody slumped behind his desk, fast asleep. "Get the potion ready," Harry said to Draco while he went to disarm Moody and tie him up. He cast various locking and privacy charms on the door so they would not be disturbed. Draco woke Moody up with the potion and then put 6 drops of truth serum, and then let 6 drops of truth serum fall onto his tongue. "What's your full name?" Draco asked Moody. As once Moody blinked dull eyes at him. "Bartimus Crouch Jr., Moody said in a lifeless voice, staring straight ahead. "Ah!" Harry gave Draco a triumphant look. Now they knew the truth. Junior wasn't dead after all. Draco interrogated Crouch for a while about how he escaped Azkaban, and they learned what an enormous bastard Crouch Senior truly was, keeping his own son under the Imperius Curse for years and years. Why are you impersonating Alistair Moody?" Harry asked, leaning back in his seat, keeping his wand aimed at Moody. Just then, the polyjuice wore off, and Moody's skin bubbled and his hair changed until a young man sat in his place. "Because my master asked it of me," Crouch said, his eyes gaining just a bit of life. "Your master?" Harry asked, with a bit of a worried frown. "Do you mean Voldemort?" Crouch said, a vacant smile, his eyes suddenly turning feather bright. "He gave me this assignment to help him return to his former glory. Explain how you're meant to do that," Draco demanded, his face pale. Draco might once have proclaimed the Dark Lord, but had long since stopped wanting the Dark Lord to return, mostly because Voldemort would gladly murder his boyfriend, and Draco was having none of that. Crouch told them about the plan to add Harry's name to the Goblet of Fire and force him to compete in the tournament. Harry shuddered at the very thought of having to enter in such a stupid game that might very well get people killed, all in the name of some glory people would soon forget about anyway. "How is Voldemort not dead?" Harry asked once Crouch had done explaining their dastardly plans. "I'm not sure," Crouch said in a monotone voice. "Give us your best guess," Harry pressed, because he really wanted to understand how Voldemort kept escaping death, no matter how much magic Harry had learned the past year. He had yet to come across something that could accomplish what Voldemort had managed: survive the killing curse and then live as a wraith. "Horcruxes," Crouch whispered, suddenly looking a lot more paranoid. "I believe the Dark Lord has made several." And after some urging, Crouch gave them all the sordid details of how Voldemort managed to survive until that day. They milked Crouch for every bit of information they could before Harry stunned him. Voldemort was hiding out in a useless artificial body in his father's ancestral home, with Pettigrew by his side. Apparently, Voldemort had managed to possess a witch named Bertha Jorkins, and used her body to Imperius on a guard to spring Pettigrew from his cell and replace it with him with a common rat. So far, no one had noticed, and Pettigrew never changed back to his human form again. Just kept running in circles. Never noticed that Pettigrew never changed back into his human form again, and just kept running in circles in his cell. "We need to get rid of Voldemort and the whole lot of them," Harry said, jaw tight with determination. "We can figure out this whole Horcrux business later, but we have to get rid of Pettigrew and Crouch as well, as they won't be able to help resurrect Voldemort in the future." "What about him?" Draco gestured to the huge trunk in which Crouch was keeping the real Moody captive. Harry tilted his head and gave some thought. Ideally, they didn't want anyone to find out that Moody had been captured at all, because when people wanted to know who'd done it, best was for Voldemort and his followers just to quietly disappear. I think we use him to take the fall. Draco's face split open in a blinding grin. I love the way you think. They dosed Crouch with enough sleep potion that would last until the next morning, which was a Saturday, and which gave Harry and Draco ample time to execute their plans. They left him tied in his office and went down to dinner as though nothing had happened. The next morning in the Coromon room, Harry told his friends he'd be spending Saturday with his boyfriend. Hermione huffed and Ron sulked, and Harry ignored them both while he went to commit murder with his boyfriend. They opened the trunk in Crouch's office and transfigured the real Moody into a small turtle before the man had even realised someone had found him. Crouch got turned into a toad, and they both went into a cloth bag that hung from his belt. They snuck out of the castle using the tunnel to Honeydukes, and once they crossed the wards, Harry apparated them both to Little Harrington, having gleaned a location from Crouch's mind using legitimacy. Let's look for that shack with the possible Horcrux, Draco suggested once they stood in an old cemetery overlooking Riddle Manor and the Beyond Town. Crouch mentioned that he suspected Voldemort was keeping one there because he insisted Crouch check the wards when they first arrived. They found the shack and some very creative curse breaking later. They found an incredibly dark object hidden under the floorboards. That thing has a nasty curse on it, Harry concluded as he waved his wand around to cast all the diagnostic spells he knew. Moody found the ring, got hurt by it, and then, with his last effort, went to burn down the manor, and because he was so weakened he couldn't control the fire ray. Who never had to pronounce this one before. De fire? Close enough. And sadly perished in his own cursed flames. Brilliant. Harry gave Draco a firm kiss on the lips, then levitated the whole box with the cursed object inside of them, never touching it in any way. They hurried towards the manor, keeping hidden beneath the invisibility cloak lest they be seen from a window. There were simple wards around the manor, so they stopped just right outside of them. Harry cast a bit of magic to see how many living beings there were inside the manor. There were 3, which meant that Voldemort, Pettigrew, and probably Voldemort's snake as well, which Crouch had mentioned. They turned Moody and Crouch back and positioned them in front of the manor, right outside the ward, so they couldn't trigger them. They never gave the men a chance to speak. Draco flicked his own wand to open the box, which then he levitated the cursed ring onto Moody's hand. The second it touched Moody's skin, Moody let out a blood-curdling scream, and Harry used Moody's wand to cast the fire, which engulfed the men at once, cutting off the scream in seconds. Phoenix and basilisks and dragon made out of orange flames rose into the sky and engulfed the manor entirely. No one will be able to get away since the flames burst through the windows in seconds and covered every inch of the building in cursed flames. Wow, Draco said, pressed against Harry's side as they stood under the invisibility cloak, lest a muggle spot them and act. Spot them to later than act. Lest a muggle spot them to later act as an unwelcome witness. This was more beautiful than I ever imagined. Harry smiled at his boyfriend, his chest full of a different kind of flames, which were currently ending Voldemort and his followers. At least for now. They brought themselves a lot of more time to figure out the rest of the Horcruxes. It took some effort, but Harry brought the flames under control. He wanted everything destroyed, but not obliterated. They just needed a bit of evidence for the auras to find, so they could piece together that Moody had gone off on his own to catch some dark withers, with lethal results to all involved. While the last of the flames died down, Harry threw Moody's wand into them so it would have sustained damage but not burnt up. While the fire was gone, and all that was left was the burnt-out manor and two blackened, smoking corpses in front of them, Harry and Draco shared a long, loving victory kiss. So glad the bastard is gone for now, Harry mumbled against Draco's lips, running a hand through Draco's soft hair as much as the invisibility cloak could allow. Me too, Draco whispered, briefly deepening their kiss before pulling back a bit. Let's get back to the school so we have an alibi. They cast a few cleaning charms on themselves so they wouldn't smell of smoke or find parts of them covered in soot. Then Harry paraded them to Hogsmeade, where they slipped off the cloak into a dark corner and changed into their animagus form so they could fly back to Hogwarts. People were used to seeing Harry and Draco fly around as a raven and a falcon, and since they both had been made to register at the Ministry over the summer, so they didn't have to keep the forms a secret anymore. They flew around the castle, making sure plenty of students spotted them, before changing back and wandering around the castle before stopping at the kitchen for some hot chocolate and sweet treats. They had lunch in the Great Hall as usual, and afterwards they disappeared down to the chamber. By then, plenty of people had seen them around Hogwarts, so they had a firm alibi for the morning. Harry went to his knees and took Draco's cock in his mouth for the first time. It was an amazing feeling to have Draco's hard cock sliding past his lips and across his tongue, and it was an amazing sight to see Draco's face tighten with pleasure until he came down Harry's throat. Afterwards, Draco returned the favour, much to Harry's pleasure. It was really good to be a bunch of horny teenagers in love in a magical school where you could spend hours and hours together if you wanted. Over the next few days, Harry and Draco were careful to keep an eye on the Daily Prophet. There was an article about the unfortunate death of Alistair Moody, how he'd perished hunting dark wizards, just as Harry and Draco expected. There was no other news about him, and no one came to question Harry and Draco. Remus came back to teach defence within a week. Sirius threw some gold around and reminded people that while Remus might be a werewolf, there had not been any incidents in the past year, and students' defence stores had not been that high in a decade. So now Remus could teach them again, and much to most of the students' genuine joy. Mission accomplished, Harry said, clinking his teacup against Draco's with a bright smile. They sat side by side on a couch in the chamber, sipping their tea. 2 weeks had passed since they executed their plan, and nothing had happened to them. The whole thing had been a huge success. Snape wrote me a pass for the restricted section, Draco said, draining his teacup, so he could start looking into Horcruxes. We already destroyed 2, the snake and the ring. Harry briefly closed his eyes. 3. The diary was definitely one as well. We've got plenty of time to figure it out. The Dark Lord's not coming back anytime soon. Did you want something? Harry asked with a knowing smile. Your mouth around my cock, Draco said without a hint of shame. Harry chuckled, rubbing a hand down Draco's thigh. He wouldn't mind a round of blowjobs again. You know, Harry said, eyes hooded as he gazed at Draco with obvious affection. I'm really not sorry we used the amulet. We're now powerful enough that we managed to do away with Voldemort while we're 14, and whatever side effects there were have mostly passed us by, I'm sure of it. Harry shrugged, rubbing his hand closer and closer towards Draco's straining cock, which was tenting his trousers. I don't feel all that different. Me neither, Draco agreed, pushing his hips up slightly, silently begging Harry to touch his cock. More importantly, it got me you. Harry cupped Draco's cock through his trousers and slipped his tongue inside Draco's mouth. Yeah. Using those amulets had turned out to be the best idea Harry had ever had. The end. So, as always, the link's going to be in the description. I'm not sure what else to say. I'm glad that you were here with me for all of this, and I very much enjoyed reading it. And just a reminder that this was by Maeglin Yedi. I'm probably not pronouncing that right, but feel free to check out their works. They're rather spectacular. So, thank you all very much for listening, and a good night.